Google's Privacy Sandbox is basically the equivalent of Apple's Scan or Apple's StoreKit ad network. It's more of an initiative for Google to enhance user privacy, and at the same time, we get more relevant and personalized ads. That's great for the user or customers, for the audience. Not so much for marketers, because the initiative entails the disappearance of our beloved third-party cookies. Even though the removal of third-party cookies, which Google has now been delaying for a couple of years, sounds very dire, there's an element of it that isn't so dire, which is the fact that Google has a lot of data to play with. It has a lot of data that it can aggregate, so us advertisers can take benefit of that and utilize it within our advertising campaigns. One of the elements of Privacy Sandbox is the fact that you can no longer get or utilize specific user level data as an advertiser. Now you'll get a more aggregated and anonymized data, which in a way is actually better. If you've ever set up a YouTube ad campaign, you can target users by interests, or more specifically, affinity or in-market audiences. So rather than you being able to target specific granular users, now you have a more broader, a more aggregated, relevant user to essentially target with. And there's a theme here that you'll see, which I mentioned in a few of my videos if you've watched them, which is there's going to come a point where I believe that audience targeting isn't going to be a thing. You'll just provide the platform the data that it requires, and the algorithm or the artificial general intelligence tool that they use in the back end of that ad network will do the targeting for you. So we know what Privacy Sandbox is. If you want to learn more, I will leave links down in the description of this video. So now let's talk about how to actually prepare for this implementation. So the first one is very obvious, which is to start better collecting and utilizing your first-party data. When we talk about first-party data, all that means is data that you own and data that your customers or your users have given you permission to use. So whether that's through them being past customers, or maybe they've signed up for your email, for your newsletter, whether it's data that you've got from a survey, or maybe if you're an offline-based business, they've manually given their email address to you. So you're not using third-party data, which is data that you've used from a third party, because technically that will become illegal at some point, if not already. Next is to make sure that you're transparent about how you collect your data and how you use the data that you take from your customers or even your website visitors. Let's say if you're based in Europe, when you visit a website, you'll get a GDPR pop-up, which basically tells you that, hey user, we're tracking you. Do you want to choose which type of cookies you are comfortable with us being able to extract and utilize, etc., etc. And then finally, more of a technical advice, make sure that you start using server-side tracking for any form of data that you acquire, especially if you want to reuse that data for your marketing efforts. You'd very likely need some technical expertise to make this implementation, and it's not free compared to a pixel-based or cookie-based way of tracking, which is literally you can just copy and paste the code and you're essentially done. Server-side tracking has a few more elements, and maybe I can do a video on that. Let me know in the comments below if that will be of interest. But server-side tracking is great because now, rather than you trusting the data that the ad network is giving you, the conversions that you get, let's say from Google Ads, directly goes to your server that gets saved to a database, and then you give the ad networks permission whether or not they can utilize it or not. So one is you're in control of that data. Second is it tends to be better and it tends to be more accurate. So definitely check out server-side tracking. All right, so now let's talk about some best practices for Privacy Sandbox, which I would recommend to start actioning if not already. So more so for my performance marketers out there, start casting a wider net when you're targeting. So we're already seeing that a lot of these platforms recommend you to go broad and to let the algorithm optimize and find the right audience for you, whether that's Google search utilizing broad match type, or even when you're targeting using YouTube ads or Performance Max, you're essentially targeting aggregated users rather than a CRM list, for example. So more of a tangent here, if you're in Google Ads, make sure that the main events that you want the platform to optimize to, make sure it's a primary objective versus a secondary objective. You can even aggregate and combine different primary KPIs if you want using custom goals. I can do a separate video on that if you want. Let me know in the comment section below, but Essentially, you can start to group up the conversions that matter to you and tell Google Ads to optimize towards those conversion points at the same time. Versus with paid social, you can only really optimize towards one conversion event. Next is make sure that you utilize some sort of a web analytics tool like Google Analytics 4. I think that's because it's free and it's a Google product. There's a synchronicity between Google Ads and GA4. And if you're an app-based company, make sure that you have a mobile measurement partner or a mobile attribution tool. And then to close that point off, make sure your web analytics tool and your mobile measurement partner are in sync. They're passing data between each other. Next is start testing out a more multi-channel approach with your marketing efforts. So rather than just relying on one channel, start to experiment with other channels. Not every person that is in YouTube will jam on Facebook, and vice versa. Not everyone on Facebook will jam on YouTube. So start exploring different ad networks, different avenues where your potential users might be. The next thing I'll say is that start benchmarking some of the metrics that you care about, right? For the sake of giving an example, let's say your website gets 1,000 monthly website visitors and you tend to get 100 conversions. And then within the previous week, you launched a new ad network. The ad network might tell you that you've gained 0 conversions. But then if you look at your web analytics tool, it might say that, oh, your average monthly traffic has actually increased by 20% and you have an extra 50 conversions a month, right? So not every data that you get from these ad networks are reliable. Hence, you want to be able to have a benchmark or a baseline KPI to see what's improved, what hasn't, and what might have potentially affected that increase or decrease. Just supporting that previous statement, adopting a multi-channel approach. Test out other channels. So whether that's influencer marketing, if you want to focus on organic marketing, you could take a look at YouTube, which is a great SEO driver, and obviously testing out different ad networks for the performance marketers watching this video. Next is start thinking like a data analyst. Start thinking of how do we collect our data? How do we aggregate that data? How do we visualize or understand the data? And then more importantly, how can I extract insights from that data to better improve my performance? Stop looking too much at the ad network data that you're using and start thinking more holistically with all the data that you do have. We're in 2024. If you're watching this video as a digital marketer, use the benefit of being able to see the data that's available for you. Next is to continually A/B test, so increase your experimentation methods. Every element of testing, if it improves performance, there's a positive compounding effect for your campaigns. Let's say specifically on the Google ad side, experiment with different keyword match types, experiment with different headlines or different descriptions, start pinning different headlines, descriptions, and finding a way to see which is more effective. Even if it's an incremental 0.10% increase in your conversion rates, over a long period, there's a positive compounding effect as mentioned, especially when you start to scale your spend. The final best practice is to start to think like a growth marketer. So a growth marketer doesn't just think of upper funnel metrics or upper funnel marketing campaigns. A growth marketer really starts to look at the full user journey from awareness to acquisition to activation to referral, retention, and then all the way up to revenue. So start to look at how you can influence those different user journeys and how you can nudge point A to point B and see if there's any friction points that you can improve. And so that's Privacy Sandbox for you. Thank you for watching the video. Until next time, peace.